On the night of September 26, 1983, a man named Stanislav Petrov was sitting alone in a bunker outside Moscow, doing his job. His job, on paper, was simple: monitor the Soviet nuclear early warning system. If the system detected incoming American missiles, report it immediately up the chain of command. The generals would then decide whether to launch a retaliatory nuclear strike. Petrov's role was not to make decisions. His role was to relay information. That was it. On that night, he did not do his job. And because he did not do his job, you are alive. Before we get to the bunker, let me tell you who Stanislav Petrov was. Because he is not a famous name. He is not in the history books most people read. He does not have statues or national holidays. Most people have never heard of him. Stanislav Petrov was born on September 7, 1939, in Vladivostok, Russia. He studied military engineering and graduated with honors. He joined the Soviet Air Defense Forces and worked his way up to lieutenant colonel. He was an engineer by training, not a combat soldier, a man who understood computers and systems and how they worked. He was 44 years old on the night that everything happened. He was married to a woman named Raisa. They had 2 children, a son and a daughter. He was, by all accounts, an ordinary man with an ordinary life who happened to be in an extraordinary position at an extraordinary moment. Now let's talk about the world he was living in. Because September 1983 was not a normal moment in the Cold War. It was one of the most dangerous periods in history. 3 weeks before the night in question, the Soviet military had shot down a Korean passenger aircraft, Korean Airlines Flight 007, killing all 269 people on board. The plane had drifted into Soviet airspace, and Soviet fighters shot it down, believing it was a spy plane. The international reaction was furious. Relations between the United States and the Soviet Union had collapsed to their lowest point in years. On the American side, President Ronald Reagan had recently called the Soviet Union an evil empire and had been publicly discussing new aggressive nuclear strategies. The Soviets, under the frail and deeply paranoid General Secretary Yuri Andropov, were genuinely convinced that the Americans might be preparing a first strike. Soviet intelligence had been running an operation specifically designed to detect signs of an imminent American nuclear attack. The Soviets were on edge. The Americans were on edge. Both sides had thousands of nuclear warheads pointed at each other. Both sides had systems designed to detect an incoming attack and respond within minutes. This was the world Stanislav Petrov went to work in on the night of September 26, 1983. His shift began at a secret Soviet missile attack early warning station located outside Moscow. The station monitored a network of satellites positioned 30,000 kilometers above the Earth, watching the United States continuously, looking for the thermal signatures of ballistic missile launches. Petrov took his seat. The shift began normally. Then, shortly after midnight, the alarm went off. A single warning appeared on the system. 1 missile. Launched from a United States base in Montana, according to the computer, heading toward the Soviet Union. For 15 seconds, Petrov later recalled, they were in a state of shock. Then the system updated, a second missile, then a third, then a fourth, then a fifth. 5 intercontinental ballistic missiles, the computer was telling him, had been launched from the United States and were heading towards Soviet territory. The siren was wailing. The screens were flashing. The word launch was lit up in large red letters. The protocol was clear. Petrov was supposed to pick up the phone and report this immediately. The Soviet military would then have roughly 5 minutes to decide whether to launch a retaliatory nuclear strike. The entire system was built around the assumption that you had to act on the warning. Waiting to confirm would be waiting too long. Petrov did not pick up the phone. He sat there, he looked at the screens, and he thought. First, he knew the system had glitches. It had produced errors before. He knew this from his engineering background, from years of working with the equipment. Second, he reasoned that if the United States were genuinely launching a nuclear first strike, they would not start with 5 missiles. A real first strike would involve hundreds, possibly thousands of missiles launched simultaneously. 5 missiles made no military sense as an opening attack. Third, the ground radar stations were not confirming anything. The satellites had detected something, but there was no secondary confirmation from the radar systems that should have been tracking incoming missiles if they were real. He decided it was a false alarm. He picked up the phone not to report an attack, but to report a system malfunction. He later described the decision as a 50-50 call. He was not certain. He did not have proof. He made a judgment based on reasoning, instinct, and a gut feeling that 5 missiles was not how you started a nuclear war. He was right. Investigation afterward determined that the satellite system had malfunctioned. The satellites had mistaken the reflection of sunlight on high-altitude clouds for the exhaust signatures of ballistic missiles. The system had seen the sun. It had reported missiles. Stanislav Petrov had been the only thing standing between that malfunction and a potential nuclear response. Now here is the part of this story that I think is the most important part. What happened to Stanislav Petrov after he saved the world? He was not celebrated. He was not promoted. He was not given a medal or a commendation or even an official acknowledgement that he had done something remarkable. He was criticized. His superiors noted that he had not properly filled out the incident log during the crisis. In the chaos of the moment, his paperwork was incomplete. The Soviet military, which could not officially acknowledge how close things had come to catastrophe, essentially reprimanded him for the paperwork. He was later reassigned. And then he retired quietly. He lived in a small apartment outside Moscow. He lived simply and without recognition. His wife died of cancer in 1997. He lived alone after that. The world did not know his name for years. The story was classified and only came to light after the Cold War ended, when former Soviet officials began revealing how dangerous that night had actually been. When journalists eventually found him and told him that people considered him the man who saved the world, he said he did not consider himself a hero. He said he had simply done what seemed right. He said anyone in his position would have done the same thing. He was wrong about that, because the entire system was designed so that anyone in his position would have done the opposite. Report the alarm. Follow the protocol. Trust the computer. The system was built to remove individual judgment from the equation, because individual judgment takes time, and time was something they did not have. Petrov ignored the system. He used his own judgment. He was right. And the fact that he was right on that one night, in that one bunker, is the reason the world as we know it is still here. Stanislav Petrov died on May 19, 2017. He was 77 years old. His death was not announced publicly for several months. A friend eventually told journalists, the man who saved the world died quietly in his apartment. Almost nobody noticed. This has been Stick Happens. History is completely insane, and we are just here to draw stick figures about it. If this story made you think about how many moments like this we never hear about, subscribe, because we have more. See you next time.